listening to Keeping It Real with Janine, your guide to living an authentic, healthy life podcast. I'm your host, Janine Strong, and today I'm having an inspiring conversation with Genpo Roshi. Just another ordinary person leading a very extraordinary life. Dennis Paul Merzel, also known as Genpo Roshi, is a Zen teacher and priest in both the Soto and Rinzai schools of Zen Buddhism. He's also the abbot of I need to pronounce this properly, abbot of Kanzeon.
That's correct.
Oh,
Kanzeon.
Good for me. Inc. since 1988, and creator of the Big Mind Process in 1999. Since his initial awakening in 1971, his purpose and his passion have remained the same: to assist others to realize their true nature and to continuously deepen his own practice, as well as assisting others in carefully reflecting on this life and clarifying the way. Hi, Genpo Roshi. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Hi, Janine. It's very nice to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad. I've been wanting to have you on for a long time, and we won't get into the details, but we reconnected recently, and I asked you if you'd be on my podcast, and you said yes, and I was so excited.
Yeah, I'm very happy to do this, and thank you again.
Oh, well, let's I always like to start with people's stories, their path, their journey, how they came to be where they are today. So I'll just let you take it away, and then can talk about Big Mind, Big Heart, which is your process, your technology that you use with people to help them transform and awaken. And I'm really excited about learning all of this.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so I was born Dennis Paul Merzel, as you mentioned, and I was born in Brooklyn, New York. But before I was a year old, my parents moved out to Los Angeles, and I was raised in Southern California. So in 1971, I had been, since I was 15, almost 16, a lifeguard at Huntington Beach in Long Beach, California. And I started teaching school when I was 22. So at 26, I was out in the desert. I was having some trouble in my life. I was in a relationship. I'd already been married to a high school sweetheart, and that lasted a number of years. And then by 26, I was already divorced and in a new relationship. And I was having similar difficulties, feeling trapped, confined, all those things that, for me personally, I have a very difficult time with. I kind of seek freedom and liberation. Mm-hmm. So I went out to the desert to get some space from the relationship. And I went out with a couple of friends, one from high school and his girlfriend. And out there in the desert, they went off hiking together. And I decided to go climb a mountain and sit on top of the mountain. And I was sitting there contemplating my life and how could I have messed it up so greatly at the age of 26. I had already been divorced, as I said. I was having a difficult time, and I'm wondering, how could I mess up my life so much at such an early age? And I was sitting there in a kind of meditation. I never meditated before. And I was contemplating this, and all of a sudden, what struck me was the question, where is home? And I don't know where that question came from. It might have been years in previous lifetimes of searching for that answer, but somehow that question just hit me, where is home? And I was looking out from this mountain peak at my VW camper, which I had parked some miles away. I could see it. And I was thinking, well, that's home, at least for the next few days. And then I realized, well, no, home is really back in Long Beach, California, where I was living. And then all of a sudden, it struck me, it was an opening where I became one with the whole cosmos. And the realization was, of course, I'm always home. There's no place but here and now. So I'm always right here, right now, and it's always me, and it's this, and I'm always home. And that turned my life around 180 degrees. It was as if I had been moving in a direction like a speeding locomotive, like a bullet train, towards success, towards all these things You could say success, happiness, name, title, position, all those. I'd already had a master's degree. I was already working my way up the ladder of what I was doing. And I still had a lifeguarding job. I was working towards the Olympics. And everything was going my way. I was in water polo, and we were national champions several years running, 3 years out of 4. And I was on the team that did make the Olympics, but I had to quit in 67. But this was 71. And so I'd been very successful at a lot of things and moving in that direction. And all of a sudden I realized that this is not fulfilling. This is not satisfying. Just having name and position and fame and security. And I realized that what was really important was knowing who I am and what this life is about. So it became an introspective moment where my light got turned inward, kind of without my choosing it in a way. It wasn't something I willed,
right,
but it happened. I just got turned inward, and the self got illuminated. And the self, as we know, is really just a contraction of who we are out of the fear of separation. That separation just dissolved, and there was no me and other. There was only other or only me, and we were one. So all things were no other than me, and I was no other than all things. And so the tree was me, and the clouds were me, and the sky was me, and the mountains were me, and the desert was me. Or you could say there was no me, and it was just mountains, just desert, just trees. And there was no distinction. And that was so profound. It was a huge, tremendous awakening. And I saw myself as the cosmos, as later I realized as Buddha, as the awakened one, as all this. I didn't have those names. I saw myself as one with all, one with the whole.
So instead of, like, for most of us, we know this intellectually, but
Right.
we haven't had that experience in our body yet.
Correct.
And so it sounds like that's when you had that experience.
Exactly. But I didn't know this intellectually. I was coming in as kind of a newbie. I had no spiritual background. I was born Jewish, but we were never raised Jewish. So I never had a Jewish religious background, although I come from a long line on both my mother and father's side of rabbis and rabbis, teachers of rabbis and rabbis themselves. And in fact, Rabbi Zalman Schachter, who was very famous, passed away a number of years, lives in Boulder. His wife, used to live in Boulder. His wife still does. She's a good friend. And his first spiritual teacher was my grandfather's brother back in Europe. Back in Poland, actually. I believe. No, maybe it was Antwerp in Belgium. And, he said he gave his spiritual life birth, my grandfather's brother. And I've been to that temple before and many times, and it was started by my grandfather's brother. So I come from a long line of rabbis and rabbis. My grandfather was a rabbi. My mother's father was a rabbi. And I had no spiritual upbringing. So that moment was an awakening, and probably because it's in my DNA, and also karmically, because I must have done this over past lives, So in that moment I sat down, I had this profound awakening, and it transformed my life. I mean, it's never been the same. That was February of 1971, And as you read in the introduction, from that moment on, what became most important was helping others awaken to this profound experience of one's true nature, and also continue to clarify and deepen my own, because I knew that my ego was grasping onto it and holding on to it as a new identity. And, that's been a lot of work to kind of let go of my identifying as the awakened one, as a Buddha, as the whole, and also to be able to appreciate. I knew everybody was, but not everybody realized it.
Right.
So that became what I wanted to do, was help people realize it. But I also, over that time, uh, got more in touch once again with Dennis, because right after that experience, it was so profound for me. I changed my name to Sebastian, just because I bought an army shirt. I took off and just lived alone in the mountains for a year. And I bought an army shirt that had the name Sebastian. It was easier to change my name when I introduced myself to people than to change my shirt. So I became known as Sebastian. And then that was 71 too. And then in 72, I went to see Maizumi Roshi. That was in March of 72. So I stayed a year in the mountains. And I met him. In 73, he gave me the name Genpo. And Genpo is a Buddhist Dharma name. And it means Gen, he actually gave me the full name, Soten Genpo. So Gen means esoteric, and Po means Dharma, which is teachings or reality or truth. Okay. And then So means patriarch or ancestor, and Ten means heaven. So it's the patriarch of the heavens, esoteric Dharma. So he gave me this big name, which is supposed to grow into. I'm still growing into it. I mean, it's a huge name, Heavenly Patriarch of the Esoteric Dharma, you know?
Wow, yeah.
But it is, you can see, I can see at least, that it is starting to really manifest as my name. So that's the name. And then the title then, in 1980, I became Sensei, which means a Dharma successor of the lineage, a lineage holder, all the way back to Shakyamuni Buddha, which is 2,500 years. So I became the 81st. I and all those who were my teacher successors, there were 12 of us, all became the 81st patriarch in the lineage. And then my successors are the 82nd. So at that point, I became known as Genpo Sensei, sensei meaning teacher. And then in 1996, my older Dharma brother, my teacher, passed away in 95. And his intention was to give my Dharma brother, whose name was Tetsugen Glassman, but now he's called Bernie Glassman Roshi, Inca in 1995, and me in 1996. So that happened, although my teacher died before actually handing him the paper, but the document was made out. It's a poem, which gave him what we call Inca, finest seal of approval. So he became a Roshi. And the following year, just a year later, he gave it to me, and I became a Roshi. And so Genpo Roshi, Roshi is a title, and Genpo is a name. So that kind of explains that.
Because I've heard people say Genpo, call you Genpo, and I've heard people call you Roshi. And when I wrote you, I okay, both are correct. Great. Okay. I guess I wanted to.
Both are correct. But Genpo is more of a common name. We never called my teacher Taizan Maizumi Roshi. We always called him Roshi or Maizumi Roshi or Taizan Roshi. We never called him just by the first name. In Japanese, it's considered a little impolite and more familiar. So some people call me Genpo because that's how they know me. But my students usually call me Roshi, and my family call me D or Dennis.
That's funny. Now,
it's very confusing.
Yes, I would like to back up just a bit, because I caught something, and which probably most people wouldn't catch, but I caught it because I have actually been living with someone who has had the same experience, and I know it's something that doesn't happen to people very often.
Correct.
And he has been struggling with just, sticking with the day-to-day drama and, wanting to go off and live in a cabin.
Right.
And so, because you said
I did.
You did. Yeah. So if you could, would you mind talking about that a little bit? Because I know it's been quite a struggle for Stephen. And,
how old is Stephen?
He's 48.
Okay.
And, it's, it's just been it's happened almost 2 years ago to him.
Okay.
And he didn't know what was going on either. It took him months to figure out what had happened. And he just knew something had changed and something was different. But yeah, it's a struggle to continue to be a human and not just a being.
Well, that's right. No, that's absolutely said perfectly. So what happens is it is very, very off-putting in a way. And how we name it is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I went to see my mother right after this happened, maybe a week or two later, she said, "Dennis, you finally did it. You've gone insane."
Oh, dear.
And she was also right.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I could say I had an awakening, but to some people it looked like insanity. And it is insanity in that we are very much in a world which we call sane. But if you ask anybody to speak about what is sanity, nobody can answer it,
Mm-hmm.
you know? But it actually is true that our world is pretty insane, the
Yes.
way we have divided it up,
Mm-hmm.
and the way we live in fear and paranoia all the time. And we're jealousy and greed and envy and hatred and all those things that come out of this divisiveness, this separation of self and other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What going insane, at least at that point, and it does depend on what you're doing at the time and how you label it, because I was in meditation when it happened.
Mm-hmm.
I was firm in my sitting posture. You know, I wasn't, and nobody locked me up and filled me full of Thorazine, you know? And my friend, when I met him that evening, he had been a Zen practitioner, studier of Zen, not practitioner, but studier of Zen. He was a PhD in psychotherapy, and he became a union analyst. And he said, "You had a Zen experience." So that really helped me, because instead of saying, "God, I've just gone insane,"
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Oh, I've gone enlightened."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I had a Zen experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so when my mother said, "Well, you're insane," and other people said, "You're insane," I said, "Well, you could look at it that way. I say I've gone sane."
And I would agree. I think I find it very interesting. I walk around, I swear I'm from somewhere else. I am not from here, because I walk around and I go, this is crazy. I don't understand how people think, how they live, how they interact, how they can be abusive, it just seems so crazy to me.
It is. But that's our insanity. So what I say is we have it backwards. Now, Buddha himself, 2,500 years ago, said we have it backwards. That he used the word delusion and enlightenment, because obviously sane and insane didn't come around till Freud and until the Western, psychology, which was over 2,000 years later. So what he said is we're deluded. You could say we're insane, and we go enlightened or we go sane. And really, in all the years I've really looked at this and played with this, using the big mind and other things, and I really feel it's true that where we're living our life from, or where we're coming from, is insanity, as well as deluded and ignorant. And what we're flipping into, the other side, is a reality of sanity, where we treat people with love and compassion, where our life is based on wisdom and compassion, not on greed, anger, and hatred.
What a concept.
Yeah. So, I would say have your friend call me.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah. Thank you.
I would love to speak with him. This was almost 50 years ago, or whatever, 47 years ago. So I've been at it a long time, and I'd be more than happy to help them look at this and work with it. Because when I came back, I left my career, I quit my job, I quit my relationship, I quit my life. I gave away or sold everything I had. If I couldn't sell it, I gave it away. And I left in a backpack with a sleeping bag, and spent a year before I moved into the Zen Center a few months later.
Wow. Thank you. I'm glad we talked about that, because
Sure.
I think it's, it's one thing to just have a little bit of an idea, but to really have someone describe it. And because do you have any sense of what percentage of the population this happens to? It doesn't seem like it's very many.
No,
Yeah.
it's rare.
Mm-hmm.
It's rare. I mean, I've been teaching now since 73, and I've been a teacher since 79. And I've run into a few cases where it's profound opening, not that many. So, yeah, we're talking about percentage is probably less than 1% of the population, maybe at the most couple percent, but it's very rare. And, it is confusing, because if you go to most psychotherapists, I'm not talking about really trained in the transcendent voices or transpersonal voices, but if you go to most, they'll say you're crazy, because you start talking about a whole different reality where there is no distinction between self and other, between right and wrong, good and bad. Now, of course, that's just the beginning.
Right.
And I was very fortunate, and I had, I guess you could say, very good karma. But by 72, March of 72, so just a little over a year later, I realized while I was living in my cabin alone that I needed a teacher. I had a profound experience that day that I was the Buddha. And so it was a little clearer than what happened in 71, where I became one with the cosmos and had awakening. Here I was the Buddha, and that just seemed absurd to my rational mind, right?
Yeah.
And I knew, oh my God, I need a teacher who is a living Buddha with a lineage. Do they even exist? And 2 days later, I think it was 2 days, it might have been the same day or 3 days, a gentleman comes up in his 60s or 70s to my cabin. I had a little group of about 20 people, and I was teaching them all to meditate. So I was 26, 27 years old, kind of an infant. And I was teaching people to meditate. I didn't try to teach Dharma, but I just taught them how to sit, and we sat together for an hour. And he came up and he said, I think you're absolutely ripe for meeting a teacher, that whatever has happened to you is profound, but you're at a crossroads, a tipping point, and you need a teacher. And I said, it's so funny you say that, because just the other day I realized I need a teacher. Now, before that, I wasn't open to a teacher.
Right.
I was pretty stuck in my, I'm the Buddha, I'm God, I'm awakened, and I wasn't really ready to open myself up to a teacher or a lineage or anything. But when he came, I was absolutely ripe for it. And within 3 days, I think that was Monday or Tuesday, on Friday, I met Maizumi Roshi, Kori Roshi, and Bernie Roshi. I met 3 people, that 2 were teachers already, and Bernie became a teacher. And
I guess you're a good example of when the student's ready, the teacher appears.
Exactly, but I had to make some effort.
Right.
I caught a flat car train
Oh.
from San Luis Obispo down to LA to go to. I mean, I had to make some effort and get myself to a retreat in LA. This was San Luis Obispo. I was in Santa Margarita back in the mountains. So I had to make some effort. But the teacher appeared. He drove up and appeared at my cabin. He wasn't a teacher, but he'd been doing this 20 years, So he was I love the guy, and I know he's passed away since then, but he just opened me up to the whole tradition and lineage, which then I became an integral part of.
So, and tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me from the experience that I'm having with my husband, is that this isn't something you can make happen. It just happens. Yeah, that's what he said. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you can't force it. I mean, the big mind process if I may say.
Great segue. Good.
Yeah, it's probably the closest thing we have as a skillful means. We call it upaya, a skillful means to trick the mind, and upaya also means to trick the mind, to wake up. It's probably the closest thing when it's done, particularly in person. I've had people tell me, watching the YouTube or listening to that first tape that Ken Wilber did of me in 2003, people calling me and saying, wow, I was listening to you on my earbuds and I had an awakening, So people have that. But your husband is absolutely right. You can't force it. It's like we can take the horse to water or the dog. My dog is just as stubborn as any horse. You can bring her to water, put her face in it, but she will not drink it unless she wants to.
Right. Yes. My dog's the
Perfect
same.
dog for me. Yeah. So we can bring someone to the precipice, but we really can't push them off. They have to fall. And it's a falling into this experience because you can't even leap, because what's doing the leaping is still the ego or pride, the self. And the self can't pick itself up by its own bootstraps. The self can't abandon itself. We have to separate from the self. And that's where Big Mind is actually, I must say, brilliant. If I don't say so myself.
If you don't.
If I don't, because it is. It is brilliant. Because what happens is the moment we take another voice, and what I've discovered over the past 19 years since I discovered the Big Mind, which was 99, is I can do it with any voice. Like if I ask to speak to, let's say, the awakened one, and you say to me, okay, I am the awakened one. And I say, okay, well, you're not yet awakened yet. You're the awakened one, but you haven't awakened. The self, hasn't awakened to your presence yet. Okay, I agree with that, but I'm the awakened one. And then we take that to ownership. In other words, we say, okay, so how do you come out as the awakened one that hasn't been awakened yet? Well, I come out as the self. I come out, with wanting things for myself, with my own greed, my own anger, my own problems, my own difficulties, with my good habits and my bad habits, my strong points and my weak points, my likes and my dislikes. That's how I come out. And we say, well, what if now the self was to empower you as the awakened one to be awakened to? In other words, that the self awakens to your presence. And you say, okay, well, that sounds good. Okay, well, let's do that. So let me speak to the awakened one, completely awakened and empowered. And then you go, okay, I am the awakened one. And you can just do that with me right now. I am the awakened one, completely empowered and awakened as the awakened one. And then you just sit there for a moment and you see what's happened. Oh, my God.
That's weird. I'm getting, my whole body's kind of tingling.
Of course, it happens like that.
Wow.
That's the power of this. And then I just have people sit in that. Okay, so I'm the awakened one. There's no doubt about that because that's who you asked to speak to. The self is over there, and maybe he's a little concerned about what's going on here, but he's given me permission to be empowered. He himself is given the permission for me to be awakened to and empowered and to be fully owned and embodied. So this body that I'm touching right now is the body of the awakened one, the body of the Buddha. Oh my God, I am the Buddha. I am the awakened one. I'm not the self. The self is just something I created to give me an ability to make distinctions such as this and that, good and bad, self and other. But I am actually the awakened one, and I have no limits, no boundaries. I'm boundless, limitless, selfless, colorless, and yet I appear as this skin color. I manifest as 5'11" and a half, 190 pounds, right? But I'm formless. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And then you own that. You can probably experience it to some extent just as we were talking.
I'm hoping I can continue because I'm feeling kind of weird right now.
Exactly. Because it takes you out of yourself.
Uh-huh.
So then from here, we look over at the self and we can see the self very clearly now because I'm not the self, I'm the awakened one. And I look over here and I see, wow, I have a lot of loving compassion for this guy because he's struggling just to make ends meet, to kind of be a nicer person, to be a kinder, more compassionate guy. And yet he's screwing up all the time. He's constantly making mistakes. He's constantly coming back to his old habitual patterns. You know, he's constantly upset when people call him names or you know, kind of project on him. You know, all this stuff. I really feel love and compassion for this poor, pathetic guy called Dennis, right? Because he's trying so hard. And we can all do that. And we look at, you know, Janine, we can see, oh my God, she's really working hard at being a good person and being more loving and compassionate, right? And you have empathy and sympathy for her. You have compassion. And then we flip it. We say, okay, well, now let me speak to that self, also not fully awakened yet. And so, okay, now I'm no longer the awakened one. I'm the self. But I haven't awakened yet either. I'm still quite ignorant and deluded. And I'm quite contracted. And I live, my life is based a lot. I don't like to see this or acknowledge this, but it's based a lot on fear and jealousy and envy, a lot on greed, you know, and trying to secure my name and my position and my role in this world, naming who I am and finding out what this is all about and why am I here. And those are some of the more positive things. But, you know, I do get angry so easily. I get upset. I want things my way. I want to be right. Oh, my God. I'm not very awakened at all.
Are you in my mind?
Yeah, of course. That's what I do.
Okay.
So then we say, okay, well, how about asking for you to be acknowledged and awakened by the Buddha? Okay, that sounds good. So now I'd like to speak to the self, fully awakened and embodied, fully empowered to be the self. Oh my God, I'm the self, but now I'm in the awakened self. I'm aware. Oh my God, I'm aware of how greedy I am. I'm aware. Oh my God, I'm aware of how I easily get angry. So it's not that different than before, except now I'm owning it. I'm owning my greed. I'm owning my confusion. Oh my God, I am confused. Oh my God, I'm deluded. I'm ignorant. Oh my God, if I own that I'm ignorant and deluded, if I can say, wow, I am totally deluded and ignorant, what a relief. Can you feel that? If you can own, I'm completely deluded and ignorant. Oh my God, I don't have to pretend to be anything but deluded and ignorant. I don't have to put on a facade and pretend that I'm not stupid and deluded and ignorant. I am completely stupid, completely deluded, completely ignorant, completely greedy. It doesn't make me more greedy. I'm just recognizing how greedy I am and how ignorant I am. So with that recognition comes awareness. So now I'm the aware self rather than the contracted self, which is in denial, which is suppressed and in denial. Now I'm owning who I am. And I own all these things about myself that everybody else can see but me. Everybody
How
can see.
convenient.
Isn't it? Like, God, I'm a narcissist. I'm very narcissistic, you know? I look at Trump and I say, my God, I'm just like that. Only I manage not to show it. You know, I have all those qualities in me, you know, totally about me, totally narcissistic, totally, it's all about me being right and me being the best and being superior. I got all those qualities. Oh my God. So do we all, you know? And then when we own that, we transcend it. So the once we own a voice, at that very moment of owning it, we transcend it. So now I'm the self, but I'm no longer the contracted self. I'm now the awakened self, much more aware and much more present to who I am. So now if we make this into a triangle, we got the Buddha over here at one corner of the triangle.
Okay.
And we've got the awakened self, not the awakened one, the awakened self over on the other triangle. Now, this is all very new. This is stuff I've just created in the last year, or maybe 2 years. And it really clarifies a lot about Buddhism that hasn't been clear up to now about Buddhism, frankly. So on one corner, I'm the awakened one. And on the other corner, I'm the awakened self, the awakened ego. And I'm not going to change the ego. As the Buddha or awakened one, I look over at the self and I say, you know, I just have love and compassion for this guy, for his struggles, for his confusion, for his continually falling back into habitual patterns and his karma that he's trying to work out, that he's trying to be a nice person, a loving person, a kinder person. He's trying not to do harm, but he's constantly hurting people unintentionally or even intentionally, on and on and on. I just have love, and I don't need him to be anything but the self. Now, this is what's new.
Not trying to change anything.
Not trying to change anything. So I let Dennis be Dennis. And he's perfectly okay and lovable and acceptable to me as the Buddha, seeing Dennis as Dennis. And then I switch voices. I say, okay, now I'm Dennis or the self. And I look over at the Buddha and I have great reverence. I have ability to bow to him for being such an enlightened being. I can make bows to him. I can offer incense to the Buddha. I can do all these things. And yet I know it's within me as well as outside of me. There's the Buddha statues, the Buddha lineage, the Buddha tradition. There are awakened Buddhas, and it's also within. So what's external is also internal, vice versa. And I can have this respect and love for the Buddha as the self. And then we go to the zenith or the apex of our triangle. So we just created a triangle. And at the apex, or the zenith is my new word for it, because I'm writing a book called Zenith.
I like that.
And from the zenith, I can say, wow, I embrace these two aspects within me. I have the self, the egocentric self, which can be matured over time with realizations and awakenings. And I have the Buddha also with the potential of becoming a mature and very healthy Buddha, a very awakened, healthy Buddha that has a lot of maturity. And I can allow from the zenith, I can allow the Buddha to be the Buddha and the self to be the self. I don't need to bring them too close together, because think of a tripod, or the tripod's not the best. Think of two pillars of a temple. And if you bring those two pillars too close together, the Buddha and the self, all of a sudden the ceiling collapses because there's not enough space between the pillars. If you move the if you move the pillars apart too far, your roof's going to crumble also because there's too much space between them. So with just the right distance, but separate, the Buddha as the Buddha, the self as the self, or the ego self as the ego self, and allowing each to be in its rightful place. For the self to operate on a daily basis and the Buddha to be there when needed, giving guidance and wisdom. Then at the apex, I'm the aware self or the aware ego or the enlightened ego, which has both the Buddha and the self as aspects of itself. So I can actually look at these two. I don't like using this analogy because people think it's funny. I can see both the awakened, the self and the Buddha as my children. You see? But they're aspects of me. Let's use that term. But they are like my children because at the apex, it's my responsibility how much airtime I give Buddha, how much airtime I give the self? How much do I
Mm-hmm.
depend on the self's wisdom, and how much do I depend on the Buddha's wisdom? Because I know the Buddha has much greater wisdom than the self, but the self has some practical wisdom that the Buddha doesn't have. Like
Mm-hmm.
you were talking about your husband.
Mm-hmm.
So he's kind of stuck in that limitless, boundless Buddha place, and it doesn't know so well how to make money.
Right.
It doesn't know well how to make plans. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't know so well how to scheme and make things happen that it wants to happen, because it sees those things as slightly beneath itself. Like when I first had my awakening in February of 71, I disowned every voice in me, every voice. That was like 5,000 voices I disowned in
Mm-hmm.
one full swoop by
Mm-hmm.
saying they're not enlightened. Greed is
Mm-hmm.
not enlightened.
Mm-hmm.
Competitiveness is not enlightened. So the competitor is not enlightened. Greed is not enlightened. The one who hates is not enlightened. All these things that I felt were no longer appropriate because now I am enlightened, they don't belong to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I disowned them. So
Mm-hmm.
what did they do? They came back and bit me in the behind
Mm-hmm.
because I thought I was past all that garbage, only to spend the next 45 years reintroducing these aspects of the competitor, of greed, of anger, of fear, of hatred, of jealousy, and working day after day on owning and embodying these in order to move beyond and not be run by fear, not be run by jealousy, not be run by competitiveness, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Wow. This is I'm blown away. I'm so thrilled that with what we're talking with I about yeah. I'm having a hard having a hard time talking here because
You're doing perfectly.
I'm in
You're
it. I'm in
perfect.
it while we're while you're talking about it. Um wow. So how do people get an opportunity to do this?
Well, if they go to bigmind.org,
Okay.
they'll find our schedule on there, my schedule. It's all there. They can look at that and attend events. There's also, like you said, a lot of things by now on YouTube. Some of it old and some of it good and some of it not so good anymore. I find that I'm not happy with anything I did more than about 5 days ago. you know,
Uh-huh.
that's why I keep writing and rewriting a book and redoing it, because after I let it sit for a couple of weeks or months, I come back to it, I don't like it anymore. So it's the same thing with things that I've videotaped, but they're good.
Mm-hmm.
People tell me they get a lot out of them. So I may be more kind of critical of myself at this point, of how I was and how I was teaching, because I keep evolving too, along
Mm-hmm.
with the big mind process. So, but there's a lot on YouTube. Then we made, and this was because of Bill Harris. You mentioned Centerpoint and
Mm-hmm.
Bill.
Mm-hmm.
We made these tapes. It was at Bill's recommendation. Bill's a monk of mine before he passed away. I
Right.
was with him
Yes.
2 days before he died. I was there all day Sunday, and then he passed away Tuesday morning. And I kind of gave him permission to pass on because he was really ill. He was never going to be the
I know.
same again.
I was doing the same thing. I was actually holding his hand for the last 4 hours.
Were you
Yeah.
really?
Yes, I
Oh
was.
my God.
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, my point is this, that people can order these tapes, videos of Big Mind. We practically give them away now. At that point, they were very expensive, but now we basically just charge postage and handling, and
Oh, wow.
because it's expensive to send them to Europe, but we basically don't charge most often anything for them, and at the most postage and handling. But anyways, they can get it by going to bigmind.org and ordering copies of the DVDs. And then the first one is no longer available on DVD, but we can make it available, but it's also online. They can have it. So they can just download it online.
Oh,
And the
nice.
rest are hard copies of DVDs. And we've got a lot of them left because we printed way too many. And yeah, it was a big mistake. But we have them and they're there for the public. And that's another good way to learn the process even before coming to any event. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And some of my events are very inexpensive and some of them are quite expensive. Nothing like the old days, but they're still expensive. But that's just because I have to earn a living.
Right.
And I don't do as many events just because I'm now 74 and I've slowed down a little bit than I used to do. But the point is that free things are there for people to work with, YouTube, the videotapes. Even on bigmind.org, there's some things that they can read and listen to, I believe. Mm-hmm. And then you could look at the workshops and what works for them. Because if I do a large workshop for many people, it's cheaper. If I do one for a small number of people, it's more expensive.
Sure.
So people can choose their comfort level at that point.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that you have so much that people can download and do on their own, because I find that trying to get people to take time off and spend money to go somewhere is just harder and harder. It
is. I'm also doing a Zoom conference called, it's not quite every month, but it's basically like, I think 6 consecutive months, like on a Saturday or Sunday, I don't remember, 6 times in a row. And it's not that expensive, and that's on Zoom. So everybody's face is showing, and it's an hour and a half long.
Nice.
And there's probably about 30 or so people, somewhere between 25 and 35 people on that call at a given time. And people can sign up for that too. So that's also
great.
Available.
Yeah, that's great. So how, okay, so is there an email address or someplace where people can get on your mail list to find out when you're doing these things?
Yeah, they can either write Mary Ellen Sloan, and that's Sloan's, SLOANS, at xmission.com.
Okay.
Or they can write Big Mind, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. Or they can email.
Let's see. Mary Ellen sent me, she said Mary Ellen at bigmind.org.
That's the other one.
That's what
it's either sloansxmission.com or bigmind.org.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
Either of those work. And she can help in any way. She's my assistant. She's a lawyer. She was assistant district attorney for the Utah County for many years and retired to become my full-time assistant, which I'm very, very fortunate about.
Awesome.
Because I couldn't manage without her. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so she's available to help people in any way.
Okay. Awesome. Wow. This has been a delight. Is there anything that you haven't mentioned that you...
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Yes, you mentioned to me, so I think it's a great idea, and that is to give away the online book I wrote as a free book. It's only online. I never printed it, and it's actually an interesting book. I loved writing it. I can give you a little history about it.
Sure.
So. Some people know him. Paul McKenna, he's very famous in Europe, but not as famous in America. But he uses a lot of the Big Mind work in his work. And he's been on TV a lot and so on. And he had a suggestion. He wanted me to write a book, much like the Conversations with God by, I think it's Neil.
Yeah.
I forget. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. Anyways. And, I've been kind of a Buddhist for a long time. And before that, I was kind of agnostic. And so for me to write a book on God was a very strange request. But he really wanted me to do the voice of God. So I started to write a book, and I actually wrote it very quickly, I think in about 10 days.
Oh.
And it didn't kind of work. So I took that book and I changed it to a fiction book instead of me speaking as the voice of God,
Mm-hmm.
I changed it into a fiction. I called it The Fool Who Believed or Thought He Was God. And it's a conversation that goes on in a mental institution between two twins. What do they call it?
Identical twins?
Identical twins. And they had been separated for some 30 years. And one twin had gotten enlightened when he was 26. And the other twin continued to be a school teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And the one that was a school moved to Bar Harbor, Maine, only to find out that his twin brother was in a mental institution in Bangor, Maine, an hour and 15 minutes away.
Mm-hmm.
So he was shocked that his enlightened brother had been put into a mental institution. And he started paying him visits once a week. Now, this is all fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And asking him questions, but he had to obey the one rule that the crazy brother had. And the crazy brother's rule was he couldn't deny that he was God.
Mm-hmm.
His identity was God. He would speak to him freely, but only as God. He was not anybody else that would be saying he was crazy if they thought he was anybody but God. So this conversation every week goes on about the sane brother asking the insane brother, who happens to be quite enlightened, all these questions that you would ask God.
Mm-hmm.
And the brother answering all these questions in the voice of God. And it's pretty profound, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved writing it. And I loved doing it in fiction. So that would be great if people wanted to get that. We could do that free. And I think they'd have to just go to bigmind.org. That's just bigmind, one word, .org. And we'll get something done in the next few days that we can do to make that happen so they can just download it.
Awesome. That would be great. Because I will be uploading this in 2 weeks.
Okay.
So that'll be plenty of time to get that all worked out for people.
Oh, perfect. I forgot we're not live. So.
Right.
So we have time.
Yeah, that's great. Now, I did have one other question about, in your write-up, I was noticing that professionals are using your work in their work. And I was wondering how different professions can utilize this in their work with people.
Well, you're so right. John Quigley has used it. He's the CEO of a very large company and has been of other large companies, including one time Motorola. Mm-hmm. And he uses it. And then Hamdi Ulakaya, the founder and head of Chobani Yogurt, who's a very close friend also of mine, they're both actually advisors on the Big Mind board. He uses it a lot in his organization. I've been working with both of these gentlemen, Hamdi, since 2010 or 11, and John since about the same time, maybe a little earlier. And they use it. And then John Cummings used it with his skiers. He owns a number of ski resorts throughout the country. And another Sherry Burns, she has a financial company, and we used to do work with them. So usually I come in and I do a workshop with them, and then for their leaders, and in fact, Hamdi was just asking me to do that again with their leaders, and where I teach them how to use the process, and particularly in the leadership role, it empowers them to be, frankly, better leaders, and also using more, let's say, intuitive wisdom. Mm-hmm. Like Hamdi is brilliant at that. I've watched Hamdi, we've traveled together, where he's meeting with the head of Coca-Cola, he's meeting with the head of Starbucks and all that. And he makes split decisions that are billion-dollar decisions in split seconds because he trusts his intuition so well. You know, and he says his secret is he can't care if
Yeah,
he
that's
wins or
true.
loses.
That's true.
You just can't. You can't worry about that. That's right.
And from my perspective, it's about getting out of your mind and getting and being in your heart, and
Exactly.
that's where the real true decisions should be made.
That's right. And so, you know, and I've done some work with, of course, Bulletproof, but not with any of their CEOs or leaders, but with the whole group. I think it was 100 and some people that time when I did it. Of course, there were a couple of phone conferences, and then you know, there's been a few other companies that I've worked with, and it does work really well. But I think the best thing is for people to get a hold of Mary Ellen and find out more what's possible.
Okay, great. I'm glad you explained that, because I think to me your work is so profound. I know that our listeners are going to get a lot out of this conversation, and it's meant a lot to me. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
I really appreciate it. So great. I will. We'll have time to get things together for people, and I'm going to continue listening to your YouTube videos, and I'll pick some out that I think are particularly profound or interesting, and I'll put links to those on the podcast website too.
Right, and you'll notice that at least on YouTube they say how many people have followed it, and I think that's sometimes a good sign that they become very popular, and they must be good. Mary Ellen could also tell you ones that are quite good, and definitely on the DVDs there's some around competitor, feminine power, and empowering the feminine. I mean, there's a number of them that are very popular voices that we've worked on.
Right, because, and I want to make it clear to the listeners, we've focused on the awakened one in this conversation, but there are hundreds of voices, not
thousands.
Thousands that can be worked with. Why don't you just mention a few, just to give people an idea what some of these voices might be?
Well, there's the one in power, the one that feels powerless. There's the apex of that. There's the one who feels greedy and always somehow unsatisfied. We call it the hungry ghost. It's never satiated. And its opposite, the one that is satiated, that is happy and content with what it has. And then the apex of that, where sometimes we are acting out of greed, and very often we're not. Jealousy is a big one. Competitor is another one. Particularly, we have feminine competitor and we have masculine competitor, and they're different. The feminine competitor is very different than the masculine competitor. Not that anyone's wrong, but they're different. And then there's the one who is no need to compete. Who feel, and then there's the ego, and its opposite. There's fear. This is huge in every voice, because there's always fear before we shift. There's always fear. And I know that from my own experience. The moment before we make a fall or a shift into something more profound and limitless, there's always some fear that we're kind of falling into an abyss. And that's why most of us don't have these experiences like your husband has had and others have had, because of that fear. So we speak a lot to fear before we make the shift into a voice. That's another voice. You name it. I mean, I'm finding voices all the time. I say there are 10,000 voices plus all their opposites. So that right there is 20,000 voices. So hundreds is too limiting. And I've probably found thousands already.
For some reason, I want to ask you about the controller. I remember that one from.
That's a big one. That's a big one.
So, what would be the opposite in the apex, or what is the controller? Because for some reason that seems important to me.
It is. In fact, it's maybe the key voice. And it used to be the first voice I always did, and I got tired of it after 10 years. So I don't do it anymore. But It's on the tapes. So if you think about it, if I'm the controller and I'm not owned, then I want to control everything. I'm like a control freak. I'm freaking out if there's a thought of losing control, or if I actually do lose control. So I would be scared to death to do something that would cause me to lose complete control, whether it be physically or mentally. I'd be afraid to do some kind of chemical that would cause me to lose control, or to dive out of a plane without a parachute because I'd be out of control, So there's a lot of fear when that voice is not owned. If I'm owned as a controller and I take full responsibility for my decisions, that I all of a sudden become the master. And the master is a very different place, because the master is guided by wisdom and compassion, whereas the controller is guided by fear and jealousy and competitiveness. So there's a huge difference in the same voice, even with a different name. So when the controller is owned and embodied, all of a sudden it becomes the master or the CEO of the company, rather than just a controller of the company. But we don't want to disown the controller, because we need a controller. So we come back and we ask the controller for permission to speak to another voice. At some point, I skip that and I come back to the master, because one has embodied the apex enough as a master to ask it to own or acknowledge the voice rather than controller. But in the beginning, I used the controller because that was the most prevalent voice.
Okay, great. I'm glad I thought of that. I think that's
important.
Yeah, great.
Let me add one more thing about the controller that we learned. So the controller not only is there to try to control others, it also does try to control itself. And it also tries to control the situation that in order to protect others from the self, it has to control the self to a degree where the self is not just acting freely and without restraint.
Okay.
You see? So that's an important point, because in Zen we have these two aspects or voices. One who ties oneself without even a rope, because it tries to obey rules and regulations all the time. So it binds itself up in knots, trying to be a good person, obey all the laws, obey all the rules, stay, on the right course. And it's a wonderful voice, but gets out of control because it's too controlling.
Right.
It's too restrictive. On the other side, when the controller is not there, the self just acts freely without any boundaries, It just acts the way it wants. And we say, well, that's the way of the heretics. That's not it either. But at the apex, we embody and come from a place as a master where we're not tying ourselves in a knot, nor are we acting just out of our own needs and desires to be free. We're respectful, we're compassionate, we're loving. At the same time, we're not bound by a lot of rules and regulations.
Right.
Binding ourselves up into knots. So there's a freedom in our way of presenting ourselves, and there's also a way of presenting ourselves that's very free. And let me name one more. One more.
Sure.
While I'm thinking of it. And that is to have great faith in our doubt and skepticism. To really trust that we need to question things. We need to question everything. What our reality is, who we are, what this life's about, that we need to have great faith in our great doubt and questioning. And we need to have great doubt in our great faith. Now, I know this is profound hearing this, because we don't usually think of this that way. We think I should have more and more faith or more doubt, but we barely ever see that it's important to have great faith in our doubt and great doubt in our great faith, because we can get too carried away with great faith, and then it becomes a kind of blind faith where we're not really questioning things and we're just followers, and we're not really leaders, because we're just following others because we have faith in someone or something. or even in ourself, because the self, we shouldn't have great faith in the self either because it's a mess.
Yeah, that's true.
You know?
Uh-huh. Great.
So I just want to say that. But if you remember what you wanted to ask or say.
Well, when you were talking about the controller, it reminded me of a saying that Bill liked to spout now and then. He or she with the most flexibility wins.
Yes. Yes.
That's one of my favorite little quotes from him. I have several, but that's one of my favorite ones.
That's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I've been quoting him a lot, especially since his passing. You know, his whole thing about being right,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and the whole black and white issue of it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's a huge one in our culture and society, the need to be right, which is just ego and pride.
Right. I know. I keep saying, where's all the gray?
Yeah.
What is with all of this polarity and
exactly.
divisiveness and black and white? What happened to all the grayscale?
That's right. And also, you know, it's also another way to look at it is that we have these two opposites, you know,
Mm-hmm.
where we have being right is actually being wrong, and being wrong sometimes is being right. Because one of the things that happens when we make mistakes, we actually learn from our mistakes.
Yes.
And so if we were always right, we wouldn't learn anything. Buckminster Fuller said that so clearly, that we learn more from our mistakes than we do from being right.
That is so true. Yes.
It's so true.
Yes.
And it's the same thing about failures and regressing.
Mm-hmm.
Like many people have lost their wealth, or they've lost their job, or they've lost their lover, their partner, their wife, their husband. They've lost their children. They've lost, you know, their teacher, or they've lost their identity, or they've lost everything they've managed to save up to. But those are the moments, it's hardest to see in those moments that we learn the most, we grow the most. Right. And it opens up new things to us that weren't there before. And so the greatest losses can be the greatest gains. But of course, we don't see it at the moment. We have to remember, oh my God, there's a silver lining in this. I just don't know where it is and when it's going to appear. And, you know,
it's often hard to see the gift.
It's hard to see the gift in the moment, but with time, we do. With time, we see the gift.
Yes. Oh, thank you. This has been so profound once again, and I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jenny. I really appreciate you having me.
Oh, thank you. Take care, and we will reconnect again soon. I'd love to have you. I'd love to have you on again, actually.
Thank you. I would love to be on. Thank you very much, and I thank the listeners for listening.
Great. Take care. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Genpo Roshi, for sharing your wisdom and knowledge. The podcast website is realjanine.com, where you can listen, download episodes, and sign up for the Real Janine bi-weekly newsletter to keep up on new episodes, archives, life updates, and of course, there's always a healthy recipe. And remember, Janine is Janeean. To subscribe to Keeping It Real with Janine podcast, go to iTunes or your favorite podcast provider. Do you know people who would benefit from my conversation with Genpo Roshi? I know you do. This has been very profound. So please, please share the love. Thanks for listening. Take care and be well.